So a common question that I think people have and rightly have is, if I have to hire a lawyer and if there's going to be a lawsuit, how long is it going to take for my case to get to a trial or get to the end? Well, as the old adage goes, it depends, and it really does with respect to this question, and it varies by a number of key factors. Number one, what's the nature of your case? Is it a personal injury? Is it a medical malpractice? Auto injury? Is it maybe a more simple case? Really depends on the complexity of your case, first of all. Second of all, it really depends very much on which state you're in. And sometimes it can depend on which part of the state you're in. And it can also depend on which judge you have within a particular court. And it can also depend on which court system you're in. So is it state court or federal court? And I'll try and give you kind of a brief summary of kind of how the trial dates get scheduled in these various cases. So Wisconsin, which is where most of my cases are at, I would say the typical time frame from the time that a lawsuit gets started to a trial date, which is not necessarily the conclusion of most cases. Most cases don't ever make it to trial. I would say over 90% and pretty close to, I would say pretty close to 95% of cases, civil personal injury type cases, don't ever get to trial, but sometimes need to get close to trial for the parties to kind of have the information they need and to sort of be motivated to settle their case. But sort of the earliest time frame is a year, and I have I haven't had a case in a long time that got scheduled for trial within a year of a filing a lawsuit. I would say it's more common that the early end is about a year and a half, and say a year and a half to 2 years, depending on how quickly you try and schedule a trial on the front end, is kind of more normal in most cases in Wisconsin. Now, Wisconsin doesn't have a lot of rules in terms of kind of how things have to happen, when they have to happen. It leaves it very much up in the discretion of the judge themselves, and individual counties might have standards they set up. I think you get into a bigger area like Dane County or Milwaukee, they tend to have more of a system, sort of a system in place for scheduling stuff. But outside of that, it's kind of up to the judges themselves how to decide their calendar. And it really falls into two main categories. Number one, the judges will kind of wait for lawyers to request scheduling. And if the lawyers both want a trial date right away, then they'll give you a trial date. It'll go on the calendar. They'll look at their calendar and the lawyer's calendar and kind of find the next available trial date. If most trials take around a week, 4 days to 6 to 7 days. So if you figure about a week, it takes little time to find a week that's completely available on the judge's calendar, court reporter's calendar, and the various lawyers involved. So it's usually it's at least a year and a half or more before you really find that sweet spot where there's enough time to do all the stuff that has to be done in the case, but also there's time free on people's calendars. One of the things that I've seen just over the course of my career is that a lot of judges are moving away from giving trial dates right away and more towards moving up to a final pretrial. So kind of what they do is they give us all the deadlines early on for, conducting discovery, talking to witnesses, taking depositions, hiring experts, disclosing experts, sometimes expert reports, sometimes there's a independent medical examination. They'll usually order trial or alternative dispute resolution. I'm sorry, mediation or alternative dispute resolution. All that kind of gets done prior to this final hearing where we all come back and explain to the judge, okay, here's where we're at. Here's the issues in dispute. Here's the issues that are not in dispute. We kind of know everything we need to know. We are going to unfortunately have to have a trial. Can you give us a trial date? And then you don't get a trial date until the end of that final pretrial, which is, I would say it's very seldom to have all that work done in less than a year in most civil cases. So then you don't get a trial date until the end, and that can be another at the earliest a few months, but really realistically 6 months or longer before you get a trial date. So it's kind of hard to get a trial date in Wisconsin. It can be hard to get a trial date in Wisconsin. And one of the reasons that I think judges are going towards that pretrial system is so many cases do settle. And so what used to happen and what still happens in other states like Iowa, like I'm going to talk about here in a moment, is you get all these trial dates on lawyers' calendars and judges' calendars, but the overwhelming majority of those are not actually going to be used for trial. Cases settle, sometimes cases settle days or weeks before trial, and then now you've got this big block of time on the court's calendar that's taken up for a trial that's not going to happen. And so they kind of got tired of that. And so they don't really give, a lot of judges won't give trial dates until we're very certain that the case is actually going to go to trial, or much more likely, and we have a better idea of how long the trial needs to be, scheduling, things like that. Iowa is, I would say, kind of the way Wisconsin was when I first started practicing a while ago, a number of years ago. So in Iowa, and I think in some degrees Minnesota, but especially in Iowa, you file a lawsuit, and within the first month or two, all the parties, all the lawyers circulate a discovery plan. They agree on deadlines and dates, and they file that with the court, and the court has the court administration set a trial setting conference. And that's just to pick a trial date, and you get that trial date however long you need, if it's 4 days, 5 days, 6 days, whatever. You get that within a couple of months of your lawsuit being filed, and then you work up to that date. And I just scheduled a couple of my Iowa cases for trial, let's say within, end of October of this year. And I think the one we scheduled for February of 2025, and the other maybe March of 2025. So actually on the kind of on the earlier side than I expected. It was just over a year, less than a year and a half. My experience has been, because the Iowa courts and Iowa lawyers tend to have so many trial dates on their calendar, it can be difficult to schedule a new one, and it tends to be a ways out there. I don't know if Iowa's going to change and kind of come up to speed a little bit, but my experience is they're very different scheduling systems that you kind of have to keep in mind when you're trying to sort of strategizing your case and deciding what's the right tempo. Now, if you really want to sort of speed up the process, federal court tends to move along very quickly. Now, the general rule is that plaintiffs, so the people that I typically represent, those that are injured in a motor vehicle accident or something like that, tend not to want to be in federal court. I don't know if that's all that true, but I think most plaintiffs' lawyers feel more comfortable in state court than in federal court. The rules are a little different. The judges are a little different. The jury pools can be a little different. But you can get a trial, and not even whether you want it or not, the federal judges may schedule your trial 9 months after the lawsuit gets started and set very short deadlines. I actually had a case. I had a trucking accident case in Iowa a few years ago that I actually chose to file in federal court because for a variety of reasons. I didn't feel comfortable in the county where the trucking company was at, which is where the lawsuit was going to have to be. Didn't feel real comfortable with that jury pool. I thought I would be a little better off in the federal courthouse, which was sort of in the more rural urban part of the state. And I was confident that if I could get my stuff together, I could have my experts lined up, have my evidence ready to go, and I could meet the pretty rigorous deadlines. Like, you move fast in federal court. I thought that if I could keep up, I thought that the insurance company and their lawyers would have a difficult time keeping up, and that kind of turned out to be true. And as we kind of got to crunch time, moving closer to trial date and deadlines for motions, that kind of worked to my advantage, and I was able to kind of push them towards a settlement I don't think they really wanted. So sometimes, the pressure can help your case. And so I'm moving more towards more aggressively trying to get my cases scheduled for trial and to make sure that I'm moving the case along, because usually that helps. It helps me. This helps. There's pressure on me. I think it helps the client. I think you move towards a more quick resolution that way. But at the end of the day, it can depend on which state you're in, which county you're in, which judge you have, as to when your trial will be scheduled. So anyway, I hope that helps. If people have more specific questions about that, about kind of what to expect and how long it'll take for the case to be resolved, feel free to reach out to me. You can go up to the link tree. You can send me an email. If you reference this video, then I'll know that that's kind of what you're asking about. So I hope that's helpful. And so thanks for listening. And until next time, everyone, have a good one.